All right, welcome back to another Game Time Discussions. My name's Emery Cuzzy, and I'm sitting here with Cameron Selby. Today we're going to go over the schedule reactions and kind of just an overview of all the things, brand new schedule for the 2024 season. Primetime games, just everything you could think, stretches, and what we kind of think the schedule means for these teams.
Yeah. So the schedule came out on Wednesday, and it's based on a formula for who you're facing and where you're facing. It's four division or your six division games, two complete divisions in the NFC and AFC, and then three of the same finishing order in another division. That's basically how it's figured out, and then they kind of formulate a schedule, and that's why it takes so long, is to try to have a fair balance for all teams. Can't always happen for every single team, but for the most part, the NFC South was the one to catch a break this year.
Mm-hmm.
AFC North is the one we've talked about strength of schedule. Three of the four teams are in the top five hardest schedules. So we'll just get right into it.
Yeah, and so up on the board right now, you see a graphic of kind of just how, if you took Vegas odds and put teams, added all the Vegas odd totals per team, you would get a full strength of schedule. Falcons are looking pretty good. We just talked about the NFC South, and it goes all the way down, and then you got Pittsburgh, which is in the AFC North. There you go. Makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
This is done by Warren Sharp and his team. They put it together for everybody to see on their website, so you can go check it out if you wanted to. But it kind of just shows how, that even line right there is if we were going to go 8.5 in every team. Gives you a kind of an overview of where your team sits on strength of schedule based on win totals coming up in the next seasons.
Right. And, throughout the year or off season, when we've done graphics and we've seen strength of schedule, that's primarily based on last season's record. So that's not always an end all be all, because there are teams that have improved. There are teams that had way worse records, like the Chargers or the Bengals, because of quarterback situations, etc. And so on. The Chicago Bears being 7-10, now they have a bunch of stuff. So it's not always, they have the easiest win total or win-loss record from 2023 that they're facing, because sometimes teams regress, sometimes teams get better. And so this is kind of to me, a stronger breakdown of how to look at it. For the most part, teams are kind of where they have been, but a little bit of swaps here and there. But Atlanta has been at the top.
Yeah.
Had the easiest strength of schedule, and basically based on win totals, even easier than that.
Right. Yeah. And so if you looked, they were tied for 31st, but you can kind of see that, like, as you said, teams are going to get better or worse, and we're going to project them to get better or worse. And then we will break down later what we think their schedule, like if they will actually meet those win totals or not, basically. So, and then we're going to do a little breakdown on how strength of schedule impacts teams, if it really matters. And so, as you can see on the screen, every year, these schedules and the strength of schedule kind of flips on itself. The best divisions get the hardest schedules, and then they regress. So like it says up there, 10 out of 14 playoff teams schedules ranked in the top 15 easiest. And then going back, 11 out of 15 easiest schedules finished with a winning record. So it tells you that, we're going to see these teams with the easier schedules improve, and the teams with the easier schedules are the ones that had the lower winning totals last season. So
right. And then just kind of moving on with that, the toughest schedules, only 5 of the top 15 toughest schedules had a winning record. And then, it goes on to say things like, of the 7 projected winning records, then easier than average schedules, all of them finish with winning records. And then if you flip it on the other side, the same 7 with losing records had the hardest schedules. So it's not an end all be all, but it's no longer a coin flip of like win, loss, win, loss.
Right.
There's a lot of, mathematics and advanced numbers to go into it. And, normally it correlates like that. And last year was just a huge example of that. So we just wanted to kind of give some quick numbers to just clarify how last season compared to
how important it was, and if you looked at it that way. you look here. We got the Thursday night football games that are coming up. Lots of really big games on this list. First week, you get Ravens versus Chiefs. What are expected to be the AFC title game.
Mm-hmm.
And then moving on, there's some division rivals coming up. Bills, Dolphins, Patriots, Jets, Cowboys, Giants, all division. Falcons, Bucks, division guys. So those are all always exciting games. You never know who's going to win those games, of course, because they're in the division. It's normally a 1-1. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the emphasis on this year's Thursday night schedule is that there was a lot of really bad football on Amazon Prime last year,
right.
and they're now in their third season
Mm-hmm.
with I guess hosting the Thursday night football for the most part. Obviously, week one is the Ravens Chiefs. It'll be on NBC for the opener. But I think the majority of these games are division games,
Mm-hmm.
so emphasis on importance. On top of that, Broncos Saints revenge game narrative with
Right.
Sean Payton, and then there's some important like Dolphins Packers, like really
Right.
exciting football games. So I think they just try to make a really emphatic point, like, hey, we bought this product. We want to display good football
Right.
that people actually
Absolutely.
tune into because now we're really going, they're breaking up, these primetime games into different streaming sites and
Mm-hmm.
kind of going away from cable since it's dying. And so you have to have a reason. And so you can't have backup quarterback versus backup quarterback and expect people to go to Amazon
Yeah.
Prime and watch a Thursday night game. Like last year, Easton Stick against Aiden O'Connell,
Mm-hmm.
63-3. Like that's not football that anybody's interested in.
Or expecting. I mean,
Now we did have a power pick on Prize Picks that hit, so we
mm-hmm.
were kind of sweating that
Yeah.
towards the end.
Of
But
course.
for the most part, the common football fan that just wants to watch a good game, like that's not drawing numbers for them.
Yeah, if I look up there, the Texans at the Jets. That's exciting. Most of these games are within the conference as a whole. I don't even see one that's not in conference except for maybe the Broncos and the Saints.
And then Packers Dolphins.
Oh yeah, Packers,
that I
Dolphins.
mentioned
But
previously. But yeah, for the most part,
they're making them
usually the Sunday night games are the ones that are division or tiebreaker based for
right.
playoffs and postseason. Which there's still a slew of games that really really important big games, but I think they just really tried to be like, no, Thursday night we need to give them some better
Right,
matchups.
of course. And then for Sunday night, they're going to get the 18 weeks. You look up there, there's some big games on there too, though. There's a lot of playoff expected teams. Rams and Lions starting it off, and then
Love
first 4-5 weeks are all teams that we kind of expect to make the playoffs until you get to the Giants.
I have no idea how they landed 3 primetime games.
Yeah, the
But
Giants. I don't know. It's crazy.
there was 2 teams, the Panthers and the Patriots, that I'm sorry, the Panthers are the only one that didn't have a single
Yeah.
one. Patriots have one. But yeah, the Giants somehow lost all their star power. I don't even know who that they on the preview graphic who they would even put up. Brian
Right.
Burns, a newly defensive end.
Yeah.
But somehow they got 3 games and doesn't make a lot of sense. Week 6 we'll probably be doing other things
Yeah, absolutely.
or not tuning in. But again, sometimes those are the games that sneakily
Mhm.
end up being super competitive.
Of course. And then, going on, you get the Cowboys 49ers, big game in that conference. Looking ahead, you get the Lions at the Texans. That's an awesome game we're going to want to watch. 49ers at Bills, Bucks at Cowboys. Just a lot of fun, entertaining games, at least, where we know like we're going to get good football.
Right.
Not much other than that one Giants game that I'm like, oh, I just dislike that game. So.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of good matchups and stuff. And then obviously week 18 was TBD.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the way that the schedules worked the last 10 or so years is that every single game in week 18 is division game. And essentially they're flexing the most important game to Sunday night.
Right.
Everything else is going to be an afternoon game on Sunday. And so usually candidates that this is for the division title, like last year, Colts Texans
right.
esque.
Yeah.
So this year, just kind of notable games that kind of stand out. Week 18, Jets and Dolphins.
Yeah.
Could be a division or a wild card playoff spot. Bengals, Steelers, very interesting one. Also Browns, Ravens, Bears, Packers,
Yeah.
another one. Jacksonville, Indianapolis. You know, throw in Washington, Dallas, just because one rivalry and who knows how high up Washington
Yeah, exactly.
can
Washington
rise.
could
But
end up.
again, Dallas has pretty much handled their business against the Commanders over the last few years. But new head coach, former DC,
New team.
so many players
Yeah.
went with him. About 4 players from last year's Cowboys team. So I don't expect Dallas to have the same, you know, success,
Right, of
at
course.
least for both games.
Yeah. And then jump into Monday night, similar story. A lot of cool games. I want to say that this is you're going to get of course, the Jets 49ers early. They want to, of course, attack week 1 with big games so people watch. But this is actually, to me, the Monday night was the lowest, like, performance based group of all the
Right.
like primetime games. So
Yeah, I mean, there are some good games in between it, but a lot of times that's just they want a standalone game.
yeah.
And also kind of to combat that, they're kind of going into or establishing more of a, you know, I guess test for double headers on Monday. So
Mhm.
this year there's 4 different weeks: week 3, week 4, week 7, and week 15 right now that have double headers on Monday. And so a lot of times with Sunday night games later in the season, say Joe Burrow's out for the season, so
Mhm.
you know, obviously Cincinnati's not a draw, so maybe we'll flex, give a couple weeks notice, flex the Patriots and the Bills. I'm sorry, the Chiefs and the Bills or something like that
Right.
into a primetime slot. Well, with Monday night, you can't really do that. So a lot of times they just try to double it up. And
Mhm.
so, look at week 3, Commanders and Bengals, like not a huge draw, but then Jags Bills. That's interesting.
Right.
And so having 2 games on Monday nights, I think is a positive thing. And on top of that, if you have just 14 games on Sunday, the common fan is only going to watch 1 or 2. But if you have game on Thursday, game on Saturday, bunch on Sunday, 2 on Monday,
Mhm.
it's like it's more reason for people to consume the product. So
Right.
that's why I think that they're doing that. And there's a pretty good amount of, solid matchups, especially week 17. That's probably my favorite game on the entire schedule.
Right. Well, I think, like you said, I'll be able to watch 6 games if I don't have, the NFL red zone or something like that.
Hmm.
So you'll be able to get more. But yeah, I definitely agree. But yeah, let's look at some divisional things. Sorry, international games first. At this point, we've got 5. I'm thinking we're probably going to end up in a few years having 18 of them. We're one a week basically. But there's some cool games going on. I believe that it's the first time
First time going to Brazil, yeah.
going to Brazil. Packers and Eagles, and the first in week 1. It's on Friday.
Hmm.
Very odd game, but it'll be fun. That game is actually highly anticipated at this point too, so that's cool. And then as you go down, you get the Jets and the Vikings. Okay. Vikings are really good in other countries, so that's fun.
Hmm.
Jags and Bears, that's actually very highly anticipated in at least this room,
Hmm.
because we think that the Bears are better than most are right now.
And it's the 2 quarterback prodigies
Yeah.
going head to head. Usually, that was a game that I was very surprised that they let that go overseas, because
Hmm.
that could have been a primetime game or something of that nature. So having that, these are all Eastern starting times, but
Right.
8:30 for our time. Half of our friends are going to be asleep
Yeah.
watching a really good football game. Um, it's kind of similar to last year with Miami, Tyreek Hill making his what would have been return to Kansas City,
Hmm.
because Kansas City was the home team and they had that in London. And it just didn't make a lot of sense. There could have been a lot of ratings for, that kind of game.
Yeah.
But again, you can't just give the all the shit games. I guess Germany got the short end of the stick
Yeah,
with
they
the
did.
Giants Panthers, which
Battle of the bottom. But
like those two teams are on Carson Beck watch
yeah.
essentially. So
Well, you also look at it like they pick a lot of East Coast teams because of the time differences.
mhm,
If you're a West Coast person, you're waking up at 6:30 at this point. You're not waking up, at 9:30 or waking up for the game prior to 9:30. So they pick a lot of East Coast teams. That kind of cuts half their ability in of teams that they can put on this list.
mhm.
So that makes it a little bit harder. So adding the Giants and Panthers, I guess, makes sense because of that too. And
Yeah.
giving the Panthers any kind of prime time game, I'm guessing they kind of group this as prime time, but we don't
And
necessarily.
this is the second year that they'll be having Jacksonville have consecutive games in London.
Yeah,
One, obviously, they're a home team. One, they're an away team. Um, but I think if it weren't for Trevor Lawrence, they would be playing 4 to 5 weeks at this point in London
hmm
because they were really trying to draw the Jags. It feels like they've been an annual team like the Lions or Cowboys on Thanksgiving. They've
right.
been every year in London, and so the last 2 years having two games. And obviously with Trevor Lawrence, you want to have one of your prodigies or top quarterbacks be in the States.
Yeah,
But if they were just kind of still never figured it out, they were continued dysfunction. They were the Cleveland Browns in terms of results.
they
I
would have been
guarantee you that they would be pushing the narrative of, hey, they're the London Jaguars
right,
or
of
something of that
course.
nature. Because for some reason, instead of continentally expanding to either Canada or Mexico, they're trying to push it overseas.
hmm
I don't know if that's the route, but I don't know, and also I don't know, expansion wise, what you can do to go overseas to make it work because the common player is not going to want to play. It's hard enough to get players to want to play in Canada for like NBA or NHL,
Right, of course.
maybe less NHL because it's more based.
Yeah,
But yeah, so I don't know. That's a topic for another day, though.
yeah. And then holiday games. You got week 13. You got Thanksgiving.
Mhm.
Thanksgiving kind of looks the same as it always does. You get the Cowboys, you get the Lions, you get the Packers, and then their mixture of opponents, basically.
Mhm.
And then Black Friday, you get the Raiders and the Chiefs. And, you know, as a Raiders fan, we play the Chiefs really well. And so that game is actually more exciting because of the division.
Mhm.
Of course, we're not going to be the better team, but on that day, we could.
Christmas Day
Yeah.
last year, y'all took it to them
Yeah,
in Kansas
exactly.
City. So, um, you know, having a Black Friday game, I believe the second year they're doing that as well.
hmm
Exciting game. I feel like the Chiefs are playing every single day of the week other than Tuesday this
Right.
year. Because again, on Christmas Day they're playing the Steelers,
Yep.
and that's a Wednesday. So a couple of teams kind of got somewhat screwed in terms of having 3 games in 10 days, which has never been done before.
Yeah.
And so the Chiefs, because they are the two-time champions, they are the biggest draw. You're going to be the guinea pig for that. So,
Yep.
and that's going to be huge if we're talking about like win total bets,
hmm
because those kinds of games make all the difference. And normally a week 2 game, Chiefs at Steelers, we'd probably hammer the Chiefs.
Right.
But short week on a Wednesday, obviously they'd be playing the Saturday prior. You never know.
Yeah.
And so those kinds of games are the ones that slip away, and then you kind of finish lower than normal.
And it's not two at home games. It's like you go
Right.
to the Steelers. You have
hmm
to go and play there. So that's a little bit more difficult. And then the Ravens and Texans is going to be a big game.
That'll be a huge game.
That'll probably tell us kind of where the Texans really sit at the end of the year. So that'll be a big game. Like we said, jump into a divisional outlook though. Baltimore kind of gets a quick gauntlet week 1 through 5. At Kansas City, Las Vegas, at Dallas, Buffalo, and at Cincinnati. Those games are going to be really difficult early, and kind of will define what they can do if they go 3-2. That's pretty good actually coming out of that.
Exactly.
But
That's what I was about to say was just if you come out of that slate 3-2, your hard part's pretty much out of the way.
yeah,
And then you can go from there. But if you start out 2-3, that doesn't mean it's the end of the world, but you have a lot of ground to make up in terms of seeding.
yeah,
Because again, only one team gets a bye at this point. They were that team last year, and that helped them propel them to get to the AFC Championship game. So
hardest division in football.
hardest division football.
Hard
there's
strength schedule.
fortunately there's only one game in that group of 5 that's a divisional game.
Right.
So you drop that, you're still going to be okay for the most part. But Kansas City, Buffalo, Cincinnati, those are huge tiebreaker games, and you got to knock them out like that. So, and then also they're again one of the teams affected by the 3 games in 10 days from week 14 to 16. Somewhat easier slate, but 2 of them are road games.
Yeah.
So you never know what kind of impact that has. And then their one home game is the Steelers, who always play them well. Last year, Baltimore dominated the game, and they just gave it away. And fortunately, that didn't, hurt them in terms of locking up the number 1 seed.
Yeah.
But I don't think it'll be as easy, and it'll make a bigger difference in my eyes next year.
And we think Pittsburgh is obviously better than they were last year, so that makes it even tougher. Browns, toughest schedule in football, 32nd. And then if you just look at, they're going to, of course, play the AFC North twice. So everybody in this division twice. But then they also have Dallas, at Jacksonville, at Philly, Cincinnati,
their
Chargers.
First 9 games. I want to read that out because it's last year. One of my better calls in terms of overall record, I was like, the Giants are going to start like 2-7.
Yeah,
because their first 10 games were just absolutely gauntlet. That's Cleveland this year. Let me read out their first 9 before their week 10 bye. So you have home against Dallas. Pick them, my eyes, but Dallas is favored. So let's just say that they're losing that game. At Jacksonville, they're going to be back to formidable, at the very least, a wild card possible team. Giants, sure, we'll give that a gimme, but you never know. 3 straight road games against Vegas, the Commanders, and the Eagles. And then you have 3 straight home games. Oh, but it's against Cincinnati, Baltimore, and the Chargers.
Yep. Rough.
So you're essentially 8 teams that will be in the playoff conversation. You're going to be hitting out the gate. So, I don't even know if I can give them 4 and 5 right now.
Well, then don't forget.
And that if that happens, that might be all she wrote for.
Right. And then they come back and they play KC, Miami. I don't have the actual order, but they play KC, Miami, and then they play all of their division
their
games,
final
basically.
5 games are at Pittsburgh, Kansas City, at Cincy, Miami, at Baltimore.
Yeah, that's just terrible.
Like how do you get? Right now, their win total is 8.5, and I said the easiest bet right now, if you want to make any kind of bet, is under 8.5.
Right.
I don't even see how you get 8 games out of that slate.
And we talked about all the ifs. If you go watch our power rankings video, there's so many ifs with this team, like we said, and they don't know what they're going to do at quarterback, running back, wide receiver. Like, can their defense be as good as they've been? We don't know. And so, toughest schedule, not sure what's going to happen. And, just if they don't come out of the first 9 games with 5 wins, they won't make the playoffs. There's no way. It's just not really possible to me. And that's even pushing it to me. So, exactly. But yeah, so then you got Cincinnati Bengals, week 12 bye. They kind of have a pretty easy stretch to start, which is the opposite. And, confidence is built at the beginning of the season and kind of continues throughout. New England at KC, going to be a hard game, but then they got Washington, Carolina playing then against Baltimore, but then they get the Giants. So they win one of the KC Baltimore games, they're 5-1 to us.
Yeah, and it'll be a kind of a refreshing thing for Cincy because since Joe Burrow's been there, I feel like they've been 3-3 or worse to start the year every single season, including their Super Bowl year. At the very least 2-2. And then last year, obviously, tough start, a lot to do with the Joe Burrow injury, but they did have a tough slate. To start the year, they started getting flowing, and then it just kind of fell apart. Again, this year, the whole AFC North was just, I don't even know how to describe it, but just screwed with the difficult schedules.
Right.
They were the one team that strength of schedule wise, they weren't in the top 5. They're in the middle of the pack. So that's going to make a huge difference in addition to Burrow returning. And we'll just kind of see what happens. But other than, having the 4-game stretch in 18 days following the bye, there's not a ton other than, their divisional and typical, head-to-head matchups that they have with Kansas City, Buffalo. That's just going to make it seem like, they won't be back in the thick of things towards the end of the year.
Yeah, I think they have probably 9 tough games. So if they win half of them and they win the easy games, they are possibly a top 3 seed in you shouldn't really be surprised by that, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Then the Pittsburgh Steelers, they were the 32nd based on strength of schedule for the Warren Sharp
Win totals.
win totals. Yeah. Final 8 games, they're against they're all divisional games, and KC and Philly. And that's just, it's going to be really tough, but if they can create the momentum at the beginning of the year and get to a point where they're confident enough that they could be a wild card, I think they make the wild card for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, their bye is right in the middle of their schedule, so week 9. So they got 8 before, 9 after, and then obviously, like we said, the 8 tough games. All of the games are at the division towards the end of the year. So even if you start off 7-3 or something of the nature, if you drop 4 games in the division, that's going to make the difference.
Yeah.
Because you have to have the target score of getting to 10 wins as a AFC playoff team. Last year, I don't think we had any. We had a couple winning record teams that missed the playoffs, but not any 10-win teams, and that was largely because of quarterback injuries. Because say Jacksonville and Cincinnati and Cleveland and what have you didn't have the quarterback issues. Well, those 8-9 records turn into 10-7.
Yeah.
And then somebody's got to miss. Well, that's got to be your target score, essentially 10 wins. And can you get there getting 6 to 7 early and then knocking out about three
Right.
of the 6, which that seems like you're backing your way into the playoffs, but it depends on who you're beating. Because if you hypothetically sweep the Ravens, that's going to be huge for momentum. And say you go 3-6, but 2 of them are against Baltimore. Like, I don't consider that, oh, I'm worried about you. You know,
Of course, yeah. And then we'll move over to the AFC South. You get the Houston Texans. They have one of the latest buys in Week 14, and then they have a really crucial stretch right after that bye, from Week 15 to 18 between Miami, at KC, and then Baltimore. Basically, going to tell us if they are contenders in the AFC truly. And these 3 games, of course, are considered to be playoff teams. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Houston, a lot of people are high on. They, to us, won the offseason overall.
Right.
And, you know, they added a lot of good pieces and they overachieved. But sometimes, a la New York Giants, some teams overachieve and then get a tough schedule and then have to regress. Their, strength of schedule is one of the harder ones. That doesn't mean that they're going to finish 8-9 or something of the nature, but I think it has everything to do with, we'll just kind of see what people's expectations are. Because if people think that they can be the 1 seed, I saw a couple people predict that. It's like, you're going to be disappointed if that is your expectation.
That's way too
If
high.
you think that they win the division game, division again, 3 seed, 4 seed, obviously, and then they hit the 2 or the 1, then obviously that's going to be something that, they're contender 1 to beat. But we cannot discount Jacksonville. I'm telling you, they were one of the Final 4 teams in 2022, and they were 8-3, the 1 seed in the AFC, 12 weeks through last year, and then it fell apart due to injuries and just poor play, essentially.
Right.
They will be back, and I'm not even certain Houston will win the division this year. We have to kind of do our first look with predictions and whatnot, but it's not a for sure. Like, Houston's like minus 180, 190 to win the division.
200.
No chance I bet that.
Yeah. And if you look at it, I mean, like, next we have Jacksonville up. They have, some pretty crucial games also early and late, so they kind of split it in the middle, basically.
Right.
They go 1 through 5 are all going to be AFC games, kind of telling us, how seeding will work for the playoffs. And then the end of it is where, they get all the tiebreakers. All their tiebreakers come at the end. But I don't see like a bunch of really difficult teams at the end there. You have Houston, of course. That'll probably be the tiebreaker of who wins this division at the end of the day. Tennessee, the Jets, the Raiders, Tennessee, and then the Colts. I mean, 5 winnable games in the last 6 weeks, basically.
Right.
And it'll kind of tell us if Jacksonville's, I'd expect Jacksonville to either be, if they win the division, of course, they're probably going to be a 3 seed to me, or they're in for the wild
Mhm.
card.
Yeah,
So
I mean, obviously you see on the board their final 5 games are against non-playoff teams from last year, so that's a huge win.
yeah,
Obviously some will be better, like the Jets won't be a 6-7 win team.
right.
Colts were 9-win team that were very formidable. So, and they've had Jacksonville's number. I think they swept them last year, and that was before Jacksonville fell apart.
Hmm.
So, and then really it'll be interesting to see how fast of a start they can get because they start off 3 road games out of 4: Miami, Buffalo, and Houston.
Hmm.
All of those again important tiebreaker games, and then you in between Cleveland, Indy, very reasonable opponents, both with winning records last year, and then at Chicago, who we're very high on. So
Hmm.
if you can go out of that 500, I think they'll be in a really good position. But it'll depend on their hot start for sure.
Yeah, and then the Colts, they have no playoff opponents from last season, and from week 13 to 18, they have a bye in there also, so that'll be helpful for them to possibly make a run late. They have to play Jacksonville to end the year. That game is probably going to be important. I don't see I don't see 3 AFC South teams making the playoffs necessarily, but they do have the strength of schedule, and that whole aspect of it is so much better than the other AFC divisions.
The
So,
Colts are the team that is going to lose people a lot of money because they are going to be dogs in a lot of games. Obviously, they're not in the spotlight. They're the only team with one or fewer primetime games that had a winning record last year,
mhm,
and they're just flying under the radar. They have the easiest stretch to end the season, and a late bye. It all depends on how well we really only have a 2 game sample size of Anthony Richardson, and people's expectations of him are just so high. To me, it's kind of crazy. But despite the high expectations, nobody's really thinking about the Colts as a playoff team. And it's like they are right there, and they're probably going to be a team that sneaks in if they win the games that they're supposed to because they have a really good roster.
yeah, we talked about it on our power rankings. It's like they're really difficult to rank.
Hmm.
Just a really hard team to find a spot for, because if they pick up 2 more wins, all of a sudden they're, possibly the 7th seed, 6th seed in the wild card. And it wouldn't surprise us. But
Hmm.
it's also like, but we see other teams that should probably do better than them. Um, and like I said, I don't see 3 teams out of the AFC South making the playoffs. So,
But you never know though, because say everybody beats each other up in the AFC North, and
right.
then you only get one, for example, and then in the AFC East, we saw really a lot of teams get worse.
Yeah.
And then the Jets are really the only team that improved, but how much did they improve?
Right.
It's all Aaron Rodgers dependent because we saw how poorly it went without him. So you just can't guarantee anybody in that division. And the
Hmm.
AFC West might be too soon for Harbaugh to assume playoffs. And
Right.
that's
Of
fine.
course.
The Raiders didn't solve their quarterback situation. So it's kind of hard to see them get better than 8-9. The Broncos will be one of the bottom teams. So one out of there. And then all of a sudden it's just like, oh, well, maybe there is 3 teams out of the AFC South. So we'll just see. But the Colts, I think if they were in another division, they would be a strong bet to make them. But
Yeah.
it's just because Houston, Jacksonville are there. It's kind of hard to put them above either one of those teams without figuring out any kind of injuries this
Right, of
far.
course. And then the Titans, week 5 bye, so early. 5 of the final 7 games are divisional. So that kind of gives them an opportunity. Obviously, we don't see them making it, but if they had a chance to make it, playing a bunch of divisional games at the end of the year and winning them, that's normally a pretty good way to make playoffs. And then one of the big things that stuck out was they're only playing 2 quarterbacks over the age of 27 this
Mhm.
year.
Yeah, and obviously that if there's backups or Jacoby Brissett
Right.
starts the whole year over Drake May, that number is not entirely accurate. But just projection wise, there's a lot of young quarterbacks that they're playing, and so they could be a scrappy team. I don't obviously it's way too hard, or I think they're clearly the 4th best team in that division,
Hmm.
but that doesn't mean that they can't scrap together 6, 7, 8 wins and just be a thorn in everybody's side towards the end of the year. I mean, they play a lot of teams like Jacksonville, Cincinnati, Houston at home towards the end of the season. all playoff teams that probably a touchdown underdog that they can win one or even two of those games.
Hmm.
And that'll be a big deal for other teams because that just always happens. It always happens when there's a bad team or a below average team that just finds a way to knock somebody out. And look at the Cardinals last year,
That's
how they just
exactly
went
what I was
into Philly
thinking.
and they not only knocked Philly from being a possible 1 seed, they went all the way down to the wild card
Hmm.
and then they got blown out against Tampa. And if they were flipped and they were the 2 seed against Philly, I'm sorry, against Green Bay, who's to say, even as bad as they were playing, it would be the same result as what Dallas did.
Well, I was going to say Dallas,
And
Arizona also beat Dallas
mhm,
earlier in the year,
that too.
and if Philly wins that game in Arizona, we're not. It's the other way around, and
Mhm.
that's so Arizona was the one that was kind of calling the shots for that NFC East group. So yeah, no, it could happen. Moving over to the AFC East, basically pretty top heavy. 3 teams. Buffalo Bills week 12 bye, but they have a crucial week 2 through week 6. So early, they're gonna have to get going. Um, we've talked about them. They regressed. They have one of the hardest strength of schedules, but it's kind of a wide open division division here. So it's like
I don't know if there's a more wide open division to me
no,
than the AFC East
I
in
agree.
terms of who's going to win. And I think they're one of the few teams that is the favorite is plus money
Yeah.
because there's a lot of minus money for favorites. Even
Mhm.
Dallas is minus money for some reason. So, you know, Buffalo, it's all comes down to, how they can get through their first 12 weeks of the year. But they fortunately, to end the season, play New England twice.
Mhm.
And so that'll be a huge thing because if they're just kind of tied at 9-6 or something of the nature, you can pencil in 2 wins right there.
Right.
And then in between that is the Jets at home. So, they at least at the end of the season can control their own destiny, but it just depends on if they can get there in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, 4 games away at pretty rough places to play.
Mhm.
And then of course Jacksonville getting better and at home. But then you go over to the Miami Dolphins, and they also have a little bit of a gauntlet, but it's the opposite time of year. It's the end of the year,
Right.
where they have to figure out how to win 4 games away versus Green Bay, Houston, Cleveland, and the Jets, and then also somehow beat the Jets at home and San Francisco.
So Miami right now, they have the reputation for being the team that's really fast, really offensively video game like,
Right.
and then they can't play in the cold.
Mhm.
Well, if they don't figure that out, we'll lose at minimum 5 of 6 this season. So, you know, we start a Thursday night game on the road in Green Bay. That's a
Cold.
night cold game.
Hmm.
And then obviously you're the Jets at home. That's fine. Then you're at Houston, not a cold game, but a team that is probably better than you right now, and you're on the road. So you're
Right.
going to be an underdog, but it's a winnable game. San Francisco's traveling to you. We'll see, but they're going to be one of the best teams. And then you end the season back to back road games in Cleveland, a night game, and then the Jets, which, if that's for the division, will be a night game.
Hmm.
So that is 4 games that you might be, shivering and,
Yeah, absolutely.
cuddling on the sideline. And again, it might be another situation where they're start out hot and then they just kind of let it slip away again. And if that happens once again, we're gonna have to really have a lot of serious conversations about them and where to go forward next year
Yeah, their
because they
future.
can't they can't keep on doing the same thing. This will be the third time
Mm.
in a row. So
Yeah, absolutely. And then you get the Jets, the final team that's at the top of this group. Um, they have an easy start. You get past San Francisco week 1 at San Francisco. You kind of, at Tennessee, New England, Denver, Minnesota, all very winnable games. You come out of that 4-1. You're confident at that point in Aaron Rodgers after 5 weeks. I mean, we're confident in our, you know, late fantasy pickups at that point. So why can't they be confident in Aaron Rodgers? And then they have 6 primetime games. Everybody's going to be watching them.
yeah,
So,
I mean the NFL is praying and hoping, please Aaron Rodgers come back and be good
yeah.
because
Oh, yeah.
they're invested in them.
Hmm.
Tie for most primetime games, despite being a 7-win team last year. They're expecting them to be in the limelight, in the thick of things, and it's just going to be an eyesore. And we're going to go into another situation where there's just a bunch of very below average, unwatchable games. if he goes down and
Yeah.
they can't figure it out, obviously Zach Wilson's not there anymore. It could be slightly better, but it's not ideal when you have backup quarterbacks playing in multiple primetime games consecutively, and they have the opportunity to do that if Aaron Rodgers can't come back from his Achilles injury.
Well, another thing is he going to be good? Like, I mean, of course he'll be better than what they were dealing with, but is he going to be good? Is it a Russell Wilson situation where we had primetime games on Amazon Prime and you're watching them and you're like, oh my gosh, these games are 14-12. It's like, okay, they've only kicked field goals.
This team reminds me very similarly to the Broncos Super Bowl team.
Okay.
In 2015 against the Panthers. Peyton Manning missed a month of the season and led the league in picks. And they still won the Super Bowl.
Right.
They just needed a guy that could manage at the end of the season, or at the end of the day with that team.
Yeah.
And with Aaron Rodgers, don't expect 300 yards a game. He hasn't thrown for 1 in 2 years.
Yeah.
So don't expect fireworks. As a fantasy quarterback, he's like QB 11 right now. That's laughable to me. He's like way down, like unstartable to me. But that doesn't mean that he can't be a productive quarterback and lead them to the playoffs and possibly even further.
Winning wise.
That's just kind of, we just have to damper expectations in terms of statistics. But if he is on the field, he will make all the difference in the world between a 7-win team and an 11-win team.
Right, of course. And then the Patriots, they're just currently the bottom of the barrel right now, and all 17 games they're going to be underdogs this year. It's just going to be one of those things. It's just they're not looking good as a team at the moment, but they have a lot of ways to go up, so that's at least good. Other teams in the division have gone down, but New England just kind of sits at 3, 4, 5 wins to me.
If you want to just put in perspective where they are compared to the rest of the field, in week 1 the spreads are out. The second highest spread, or longest spread, is -5. The New England on the road, were they against Cincinnati, -9 already. So that just kind of shows how the NFL feels about them.
And I'd probably think they would lose by more than 10. So
the only thing that I think can give them solace is that their defense is still going to be really good.
Mm-hmm.
They had a top 10 defense without their 2 best players last year. Mm-hmm. Christian Gonzalez is back. Matthew Judon is back. So they will be very good defensively. But here's the thing. Carolina was really good defensively last year. Nobody wants to talk about it, but they had the number 1 pick in the draft despite that.
Yeah.
New England's offense could be considered even worse than Carolina's was last year. That's debatable, but it's in the conversation.
Absolutely.
So, their schedule's not easy. Their coach is no longer there. They're just the bottom dweller to me right now.
Mm-hmm. And so it's moving over to the AFC West. You get the reigning Super Bowl champs 2-time. We'll see if they can finally, first to ever do a three-peat. They're going to come out with some big tiebreaker games in week 1 and week 2, both at home though, luckily. So they get Baltimore and Cincinnati at home. Those games will be big when it comes to week 18 when we're trying to figure out who's going to the playoffs. And then they have like we talked about, one of those 3-game stretches, but I actually think their 3-game stretch is more difficult than Baltimore's was, just because you get Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Houston back to back to back. So
right. Yeah, I mean, it's really good that they got back to back. They're 2 essentially most important games. I know San Francisco is a more anticipated game. Losing that game means nothing,
right?
Because seeding wise, Kansas City losing to Philly last year meant nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely nothing. It's just a very fun ratings draw. Mm-hmm. But interconference games don't really mean much. But teams that are vying for the 1 seed, to me, it comes down to Cincinnati, Baltimore, Kansas City, and maybe Houston as a 1 seed.
Mm-hmm.
And you knock out 2 of those opponents at home early, you're feeling really good, and there's not like the urgency to overcome really towards the end of the year. But we'll just kind of see what happens. But really a stretch where they should start minimum 4-1.
Yeah.
And then they have a bye. And I know it's at San Francisco, but coming off a bye with Andy Reid, that's as good of a situation as you could have.
Right.
The only real thing is just kind of scheduling. I said it before, they're playing on every day of the week this year except for Tuesday. So a lot of maneuvering, a lot of short game stretches towards the end of the season. Again, 3 games in 10 days. before their road game, Week 18. We typically don't see their starters playing Week 18 because they're so good. But they're going to be right in the thick of things once again.
Yeah, and I don't see anybody obviously challenging them for the division.
No.
I think maybe if they wanted to play in Week 18, it would be for, the number 1 seed so they can get a bye, play at home all the time. But the Raiders, winnable stretch, Week 15 through 18. This team kind of feels, we've talked about it before, they kind of have a wide range of outcomes to me because that roster is so good. Quarterback situation is so bad. You could win 5 games. You could win 9 games. It's just, to me, they're just so open, and they get to finish the season with, Atlanta will probably be the 1 seed in the NFC South. Then they get to play Jacksonville, who's probably going to be better than they were prior, but they can still, the Raiders are going to be good. So they're going to have a good defense. They're going to have, good athletes. They just got to get the ball to them. So,
yeah, I mean, like you hit the nail on the head. It's just hard to place this team record-wise right now. It'll probably be one of our least confident goes, but there's so many games that they can win. But there's also a lot of those games that I wouldn't be surprised at all if Denver were to beat them.
Yeah.
Or, Carolina. I know it's in, Vegas, but it's a dome. It's a neutral site stadium. Not as much as Dallas, but those typically aren't just, we're going to have a homestand.
Right.
Carolina goes in and beats them. I'm not going to be shocked, kind of thing. It just kind of depends on how things play out for them and how much their quarterbacks can overachieve. Because I don't know if Gardner Minshew, even though he was a big signing, will be the quarterback the whole year. Aiden O'Connell did okay enough. So if Gardner comes down with an injury and Aiden comes in and he's fine, he could probably keep the job.
Yeah. I mean, so we've had Aiden played last year for us, of course, with Jimmy G going down and stuff. Like, I like Aiden, but we need more production when we have such good receivers. We now have an added tight end. We lose Josh Jacobs. We replace with Zamir White, who had good production while he was gone. So it's like we have good players everywhere. We just need to trust, I guess, the coaching staff and hope they can figure out how to win a few extra games than we're expected. And I don't know if they can. And like you said, the Carolina Panthers could beat us, but then also we could beat the Kansas City Chiefs. That's kind of the thing with
all
this.
On the board.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing with this team. It's exciting, of course, but I don't see us as a playoff team. It's exciting to go into every week wondering what's going to happen. Don't bet the Raiders very much this year because you just won't get them right. But yeah, if they go into Kansas City and win, okay, it's not surprising to me because we've done it and we're pretty good at it, actually. But if, like you said, Carolina could beat us, New Orleans could beat us somehow, and that's in a dome in New Orleans. So, yeah.
Yeah, and then with Denver, be quick on them. They're one of the bottom teams this year. I think Sean Payton could have them overachieving, but it's just they're gonna be dogging a lot of games, a lot of situations, notable games that they have. Revenge game narrative with Sean Payton going back to New Orleans late in the year, and then the revenge game with Russell Wilson if he's the starter on a primetime game against Pittsburgh. So, I think this will be a growing year, transition year for them. They do have a really tough, so even if they do overachieve, I don't consider them a playoff caliber team because of their stretch towards the end of the year, just 4 straight teams.
Yeah, it's going to be rough for sure going into those places. Chargers, 6 home games in the last 8 weeks. That's always helpful. And then you've got them they travel the most in the NFL in 2024. That just normally that is a deterrent on if you're going to be able to, it's just the rest, the recouping of your body, things like that. And of course, they're on the West Coast and they're going to play some East Coast teams, so they're going to have to travel across the whole country. So
exactly. I mean, and then they have multiple stretches where very winnable games. But like you said, going to Atlanta a lot. If it was straight up head to head, I would like them, but that's on a short week because they play Monday Night Football. Then they got to go across the country to Atlanta. That's a droppable game. New England on the road, after a tough division game. You just never know.
Yeah.
And so, back to back games that they end the year against teams that we don't expect in the playoffs that I wouldn't be surprised if they dropped. It's going to be interesting to see how the public, holds Harbaugh because his first year at Michigan, they were a bottom dweller team.
Right. Of course.
And then he put them to about 7-5, 8-4, and they're like, he's underachieving. And then doesn't make the playoff. What are we doing? And then he's getting embarrassed against Ohio State, and then he leaves it just in a perfect situation.
His 4 years, like he brought the squad in, he did the whole work for 4 years, and that's normally what happens. I actually think that this division is interesting because it's the opposite of the AFC East, where you have the fact that you have one team that you're pretty confident in, and then 3 teams that you have basically no idea. Very wide open to see who is the worst in this division rather than the best.
Yeah, so. And similar to what you said with the Raiders range of outcomes, if they're 6-11, not surprised. But if they're 10-7, like that's just something that I expect because I really do admire Jim Harbaugh and what he can do.
Right.
But typically, he's had a year transition, and then he really comes into his own. This year, he didn't really have a ton of spending to do or be able to do, but he did a really good job in the draft. And it just kind of depends on how quickly those things can translate over into winning success.
Right, of course. And then so we'll get into one of the best divisions in football, if not the best, in the NFC North. The Detroit Lions, last year's team that we thought was going to the Super Bowl, lost to San Francisco late in the game, basically. 14 of the first 15 games are in a dome, so we shouldn't have to worry about weather with this team. And then their final stretch, they get 4 home games against Chicago, Green Bay, Buffalo, and Minnesota, and then they have to go to Chicago and they have to go to San Francisco. That'll be a little bit difficult little schedule there, but
yeah, we love Detroit.
Yeah,
at GTD, they're my favorite roster. I don't know if you can have that same sentiment, but
they're up there for sure.
It's
top
such
3.
a fun team. Dan Campbell's awesome to watch and see what he's done with this team, despite all the scrutiny. And the only thing that I hate about this is that their bye is week 5.
Yeah,
like they can't really get on kind of a run. That first 4 games they could start 4-0. Rams, Bucks, at Arizona, and then Seattle. Easy stretch. You don't want to have a bye then. Like usually you want the bye in the middle of the season, right after I played Dallas, San Fran, and then Green Bay. Oh, we need some little bit of break to recoup.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even if you drop a couple, hey, let's push it to the side and then we'll finish the season strong. Well, this year they had after a potential 4-0 start, I'd be shocked if they were 3-1. But then they come out of the bye, 4 road games out of 5 against Dallas, Minnesota, Green Bay, Houston. I don't think that they'll lose the majority of those games, but it's just not ideal.
Right.
Their schedule is not the hardest, but it's just those kinds of things are when they kind of put this schedule together. Like that to me is a loss, or they're a loser coming out, because it's just like those are games that probably would be more wins, but where they were placed, like that, it's going to be tougher to overcome. And then, like you said, to end the year 4 out of 6 at home, back-to-back Thursday night games, or one's a Thursday morning game. But then the game of the year to me, Monday, week 17 against San Francisco, that could be a 1-seed game. And Detroit, I know, has circled it in red ink.
Right.
That's the game that we are going. It doesn't matter if we've underachieved up to that point. That is the game that we are going to come in and bust kneecaps.
Yeah, we're going to win that one no matter what it takes. But yeah, and then Green Bay Packers, they have a tough stretch through the middle of the year. Houston, Jacksonville, Detroit, Chicago, San Fran, Miami, Detroit, and then Seattle to end that little stretch there. Then they have 4 straight night games. I just think that that is a really odd, rough, weird schedule to me. Because, you get Houston, you get Jacksonville, you're playing those AFC teams. Not as important. That's fine. But then you kind of go into a quick NFC gauntlet where you play Detroit, a much improved Chicago team, and then San Fran. And that is going to be a really telling point of the year to me, right there in the middle of the year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we've said this in a previous episode. A lot of people have Green Bay as a dark horse in this division. They were the youngest playoff team in decades. And what they did, they were up in the fourth quarter against San Fran on the road, destroyed Dallas. So you expect, hey, we're going to start in the top 4 and then compete to be number 1. I think it's a year too early, and they're one of the teams that I would probably anticipate not taking a step back because they were 9-8, but they finished the year the first or second hottest team in the NFC, and people are expecting them to stay there, which probably they're more in the 4 to 5 to 6 range.
Mm-hmm.
That is probably where I'd place them again. Like they're 9-8 last year, didn't feel like that, but this year I feel like 9 or 10 wins is below what some people even have in mind for this team.
Yeah, I think for me personally, it's like, well, we're talking about Green Bay and Chicago. Who's going to be number 2?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a lot closer than people are acting, especially with, we'll talk about Chicago in a second, but they have a fourth place schedule.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I think Chicago has a better chance of getting 11 wins in like totality. Exactly. And so it's like, I don't think I can't put Green Bay as a dark horse because I think Detroit is just so much better. But to me, it's like, I think Chicago's got a better chance of being the number 2 seed if they do all the right things. They'll obviously have to play each other twice. That'll be telling. But they're going to get some easy teams. And so it's going to be a little bit of it's going to be a lot closer than people are thinking. And then Minnesota, naturally they were going to regress. So you look at it and you get the post bye. They got really difficult stretch. They got 4 games at the Rams, at Jacksonville, at Tennessee, and then at Chicago. They also get Detroit and Indy at home. It's like, okay, after that stretch, is it time for JJ McCarthy to come in and play? If everything happens as we expect it to, where they lose 5 of those games, JJ McCarthy, week 13 versus Arizona, soft landing spot. I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, they're probably one of the teams that needed a later bye than most. Yeah. And it wasn't because of injuries. It's just because that we want like a target date to place like, hey, when's this quarterback starting? Because most of these rookie quarterbacks outside of Michael Penix, obviously, are going to start week 1. Drake May is probably going to be thrown to the fire earlier than we would want. I would not have him play at all, and he probably is playing week 5 or 6. And then look at JJ McCarthy. I really don't know. Normally, you want a long extended week.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we, like you said, 3 straight road games, week 10 through 12. Not extremely like just for sure losses.
No.
But usually you don't want your rookie quarterback just like, all right, road. Like you want a good environment. You want a team that is beatable. Like we said, week 13 against Arizona, you finished the season with 3 straight home games at Seattle and then Green Bay and Detroit. So that's a solid sample size. But to kind of put a picture of where the public thinks they're at right now, they're underdogs against the Giants week 1. Even though they're on the road, that was shocking to me. Just because I thought that Giants were far and below everybody else for the most part in the NFC, other than, I guess, Carolina. So them being favored, that just kind of shows like, oh, well, maybe Minnesota might be actually worse than what people think.
Yeah, and I think personally, Minnesota regressed on defense, pass rush. They regressed at quarterback, but they still have a lot of really good pieces. I mean, we shouldn't just write them off. I don't know what's going to happen with Sam Darnold, of course. But I think that this is one of those teams with a really wide outcome that we kind of talked about with the other Raiders and stuff. They could end up being a 4-win team to me. They could end up being an 8-win team because I think, they have an opportunity to win some of these games in the earlier weeks, week 1 through 5. And if that happens, I don't know this JJ McCarthy plays as much as we think. He might be much later on. So he might get the year. away, but we'll see. I mean, it's very up in the air with Minnesota. I wouldn't want to be a fan right now until next year probably, and they still have to figure out the Jay Jetta's contract stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That is another question mark that you just add to it. So, but yeah, and then the Chicago Bears, 4th place schedule, get to play Carolina, Washington, Arizona, and New England, consecutive home games. Just
again, we've said we're hammering them making the playoffs.
Yeah.
You can't tell me after that schedule that they came out that they're going to be under a 10-win team, if barring injury.
Right.
Because, they start the year Tennessee at Houston at Indy, Rams, Panthers, and Jags all at home, 3 straight, and then the bye. And then after that, at Washington, at Arizona, New England. Like, if they could be 7-2 after 9 weeks, and I wouldn't be shocked.
And then they get 2 home games right after that.
Mm-hmm. New England, Green Bay, 3 straight home games.
3 straight home games after that. Yeah.
Yeah. So really, their meat of their schedule doesn't happen until Thanksgiving, and that's why I'm so excited about that game. We'll talk about that in another video.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they're going to be very, very good, and that schedule did a lot of wonders for them.
And that's why we wonder if they're going to be above Green Bay, because as much as we want to put Green Bay up there, like you said, they were 9-8. They underperformed for most of the year. They were not that good.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden they caught, you always say, fire in the bottle. Well, can they continue that? I don't know. I mean, if I look at the rosters, I'm probably taking Chicago's roster. And that's including quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
And so that makes it like where, of course, age is something that we have to think about and getting into games. But we watched CJ Stroud do it last year with a team that was much worse, and he took them a lot farther. So why couldn't it happen is my thing. I wouldn't be surprised if they won 12 games.
Right.
So then the NFC South, you got the Tampa Bay Bucks starting it off week 11, the gauntlet 1 through 10. I mean, they just have to play everybody basically. They get Detroit, Philly, Atlanta, at New Orleans, Baltimore, Atlanta again, and then at KC, and then San Francisco at home. I see them winning out of those games that are up there. They probably beat New Orleans. They probably split it with Atlanta. I really have a hard time finding another game that they win, though.
Yeah. I mean,
Two
it's
games.
the NFL, so you can't always just be like,
right,
the favorite's going to win every time, because that just doesn't happen.
Give them Philly.
Sure.
Whatever.
I mean, whatever. But still, like you said, 3 to 4 wins in the first 10 weeks is a tough start. And I know this division is the worst in football, but Atlanta has one of the easiest schedules. We showed the graphic earlier.
Mm-hmm.
How much theirs compares to everybody else. You're not going to win this division at 8-9, 9-8. I don't think. And so they could be out of the running and be shooting for a wild card. Now, you could see a wild card team get in at 8 wins in the NFC. But I think they're going to have some ground to make up. And then after that stretch, 4 out of 5 road games.
Mm-hmm.
Right after the bye. You finish 2 at home with Carolina, New Orleans. Probably wins, but will they matter at that point?
Right.
It'll be very interesting. It sucks for Baker Mayfield, because I was really happy with his, rebound season. He earned his extension, every single dollar that he received in his $100 million contract. But, if he regresses this year, I don't want the front office to be like, okay, new quarterback, and then all of a sudden he's on the hot seat again, because I don't think he deserves that. Despite the whole conference or the whole division having a really, formidable, easy schedule, Tampa Bay, obviously they won the division, so they have the hardest one. And, it's hard to see them not rebounding, but I guess repeating the success that they had towards the end of the season. 9-win team that upset Philly and did it emphatically.
Right.
And then obviously with Detroit, who had San Fran on the ropes. Well, Tampa Bay was right there with them. And then Baker played a perfect game. And then on his potential game-tying drive through a pick, is what it is. That happens. But I don't know if they can be back in that situation once again.
Yeah, and they do have an easier stretch to end the year. Let's hope that Baker's still the quarterback and they haven't decided to do something crazy, because It's the NFL. Anything can happen. New Orleans, they have one of the they only have one division game after week 10, so all of their division games are
Yeah,
early.
that was strange.
And that seems a little odd for sure. Which the only division game after week 10 is week 18.
Yeah,
because they're all division games. So kind of really weird how they did that. And then they have a tough stretch throughout week 2 through 5. Got to go to Dallas, go to Atlanta, and go to KC, and then they play Philly. I mean, I think that's an 0-4 stretch, obviously. And then they're going to play the division. So they'll probably come out of by week 10, 3-7 to me? 2-8?
No. That's crazy to me, but no, because there are other games on aside of that is, you get home games against Tampa, Denver, Carolina, at Chargers, neutral site game, at Carolina, probably be favored, and then home games against Atlanta and Cleveland. Like all of those games could be won, and they could just lose that 4-game stretch that we talked about. That's the frustrating thing about New Orleans is they're another team that's really hard to place.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't be shocked if they were 3-7, but just because they lose that 4-game stretch, I don't anticipate them being dogs in many of those other games.
Right.
So it'll be interesting. Let's place them at 5-5, 5-6, just to where their roster probably lies in the NFL.
Yeah.
They were, I believe, around 24, 25 in our power rankings.
Yeah.
So we're not high on them, but they're probably going to overachieve because they're stretching. Then after the bye, they come out Rams home, Giants, Washington. Then you have the Raiders, and then the Bucks included in those games to end the year. So
strength of schedule matters, guys.
it does. So they're like a 5-win team that's probably going to win 7-8 games just by default, and they're going to probably kick themselves out of the discussion for the top 2 or 3 quarterbacks in this draft class. So they're probably going to be just in a purgatory of just too good to suck, but not good enough to
of course,
enter the upper echelon of the NFC.
And then you get to the Atlanta Falcons, betting favorite to win this division. 4 of the first 5 games are at home, and then the final 8 games are against teams that did not make the playoffs in 2023. Easiest schedule, easiest win, lowest win total against for the opponents. Atlanta kind of has it set up for them. They have a solid offense. They have a solid team. Weird drafting, whatever, but they look like the favorites in this division. It is what it is. So
yeah, I mean, similar to Detroit last year in 2023, their draft was very puzzling. They overdrafted Jahmyr Gibbs by about 20 spots. Jack Campbell wasn't considered a first rounder by any, and they took him in the top 20, and they still won the division for the first time in 30 years.
Right.
So Atlanta is in the similar boat. We hated their draft, and they're still going to win the division anyways.
Yeah.
That's kind of how we feel. I believe outside of Kansas City, they're the biggest favorite in terms of odds to win the division. It's not a number that you'd want to bet, but it's hard to just see a path where they don't. Even if Kirk doesn't come back and isn't his old self, and they go to Michael Penix, they could still win 10 games with this schedule.
Absolutely. And then Carolina, they're not going to play anybody until week 11. Any playoff teams from last year until week 11. I mean, Carolina has an opportunity to be a 4, 5, 6-win team because of the fact that they improved on offense, but more so than that, they have one of the easiest schedules in football. So I could see them, of course, divisionally, they could win some games. You could beat the Saints. They could possibly find a way to beat the Bucks, maybe even Atlanta. All domes, for the most part, except for the Bucks. So, there's opportunities there. And then they're going to play all the 4th place teams. They're going to get the easiest schedule. And they have a chance to do a little bit, but it's not going to be, it's not going to turn around the franchise or anything like that. They're just going to be a bottom team that does better than expected.
I don't anticipate them being a team that we talked about Arizona being the thorn in people's side because of their, they're just so young. I don't see them being a team that is knocking out Kansas City surprisingly, or Dallas, or Cincinnati, etc. But a lot of winnable games. Like you said, the easiest division in football, first and foremost. That's besides the point. So give them optimistically 2 to 3 wins. Wouldn't be shocked if it was more. And then Washington, you play the Giants, you play Tampa, or I'm sorry, not Tampa, their division, Arizona. So there's a good amount of games where it's just like, yeah, they're basically Houston last year, where Houston bottom lowest win total, and obviously vaulted to win the AFC South. It was one of the Final Four. They will not win the division, but they're the lowest win total again, 4.5, and probably an easier bet to win 5-6 games just because of their schedule. And I expect a lot of they did a lot of positive things. Whether or not we think that Brooks and Sanders and Leggett will pan out, they're trying to build around Bryce Young.
Yeah, they did something.
And I don't think Bryce Young, everything was primarily like, oh, he just can't play at this level. He just went into a shitstorm and tried to make everything work,
awful.
and it just did not. So instead of Josh Rosening it or Sam Darnolding it, they're like, okay, our bad. Let's try this again.
It's a trickle-down effect, too. It starts at the top. They haven't been good in a while. They haven't had, they got Cam Newton a while back, and they haven't had anything that spectacular since, basically. But they've, they could, in turn, get better, is how I look at it. And so just losing Brian Burns was really sad. Losing most of their defense was hard because they were so good on defense. But we saw what that meant. It meant their 30th or 31st offense couldn't get them anywhere, couldn't win games. And they needed to do something on that side of the ball rather than keep their top 5 defense. So they tried that. We will see what happens. But jumping over to the NFC East, start with the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah. It's funny because it's funny when we make predictions of like, oh, what do you think the spread is, or what do you think the win total is, and you just nail it, and you're just like, okay, I'm on the same page. So obviously their win total is 10.5.
Yeah.
I came out from this schedule. My first reaction was like, I don't see more than 7 losses on this schedule, but I also don't see more than 11 wins.
Right. There you go.
No matter what, they're 10 or 11 win team. Lo and behold, they're 10.5.
Yeah.
So it's a number that you probably shouldn't bet because they're straddling right where it is, but have a lot of winnable games. They've been like the king of the tomato cans. If you watch First Things First, that's something Chris Broussard always says. They just beat up on the easy teams, and then they struggle against the hard teams.
Yep.
This year, fortunately, I don't know if it's a good or bad thing, but all their hard games are at home. But they haven't been a great home team in recent years. So I don't know if that's a good thing or not. I'm actually going to the Bengals Cowboys game Monday Night Football week. What is that, 14? They're going to lose that game. But it is what it is.
Probably.
I just want to. I just want to see a good football game. So, but yeah, Baltimore at home. Obviously, Philly at home. They played Detroit. San Francisco is the easiest L on the schedule. I hated that it's a primetime game because once again they're going to be handled on Sunday Night Football, and then it's just going to be a talking point. But Houston, another one at home. But then a lot of road games at Carolina, at Pittsburgh. Obviously, their division at Cleveland is a tough one, but they're at home. That's probably the one game that's going to figure out the whole thing of if they go over or under.
Right.
But yeah, it's a reasonable schedule. It's really easy to kind of pencil the range of outcomes for them. But unless it's injuries, they're by default going to be one of the top 6 teams.
Right.
And, unless there's just everybody overachieves, I don't see a way that this team doesn't make the playoffs unless Dak goes down.
Yeah, and I was thinking about, you said you're going to that game, the Cincinnati game. Well, you said you wanted good football. Well, the last time you went to watch the Dallas Cowboys, it was not good football.
No, it was not.
So Green Bay versus Dallas last year was the last game Cam went to. So we'll try to forget that. But
I slammed an alcoholic drink on the ground, and then we left, and it went all over this lady in front of me. I felt so bad.
Oh, no.
But I was so upset.
I think she was probably upset and then more upset.
Yeah.
But going over to the Philadelphia Eagles, truly, this is, of course, it's always the Eagles and the Cowboys who's going to win the division. I think it's more predicated on how the Eagles do, not how the Cowboys do. Like you said, it's kind of cut and dry what they're going to do. Early stretch, kind of is going to be telling because I don't think it's too difficult. Green Bay, Atlanta, at New Orleans, at Tampa Bay, Cleveland at home, and then at the Giants. Kind of feels like they could win all 7 of those pretty handedly. So I think that's going to be a really good way for them to start. And if they go 6-1 or 5-2, if they go 5-2, I think it's an underachievement in that group. So
yeah, I mean their schedule to me, it worked out really well for them. All their hard games are kind of spread out. Yeah. So the games are all spread out. Dallas obviously week 10 and then week 17. That's probably going to be a for the division type of game or a big deal. And then Baltimore's kind of spread out. You see Cleveland, Green Bay's week 1 in a international game. So yeah, it's not they don't have a gauntlet like a lot of teams that when they play good teams, they don't really have consecutive games that's just like, oh, this is rough. Like their hardest 2-game stretch is probably Green Bay, Atlanta. They're both at home and they're both week 1 and 2. So yeah, I mean I would feel really good as a Eagles fan about this schedule. They're easy bet to me to win the division, and they should be vying for a 1 or 2 seed.
Yeah, and then like you said, for final 5 games, they're at home, so they're gonna be comfortable. I think by the time that we get to those last 5 games, and then they should just be able to hammer them and get in and out, and hopefully, I expect 12 wins out of this team, and they underachieved last year at the end of the year, some just imploding. But you have a whole year to fix that. Hopefully that's fixed.
And they actually targeted what their flaw was. Like with Dallas, they didn't get better this offseason.
Yeah.
You can hope that their draft picks worked out, but they're again at all positions. Their major positions that they picked are ones that they really have no experience at.
Right.
So it's hopeful or wishful thinking. Philly was like, our DBs suck, so we're gonna get the first and third best DB in this class, and then we're gonna bring back Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who's a high-end, high-motor player, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, your secondary is probably top 10.
Yeah, solid. They have Darius Slay still.
Yeah, and then there are 2 veterans that they lost. Fletcher Cox left, but we got Jalen Carter, we got Jordan Davis, and Jalen Carter. Yeah, a couple of Georgia boys, and then center's is a really easy position to overcome. I don't think that just because Jason Kelsey's gone, their tush push is not going to work anymore. It'll probably be slightly less successful. And then they bring in Saquon as a luxury pick. Like they're right there with Philly.
Yeah, and they re-sign all their players.
With San Fran and Detroit.
Right. They re-sign AJ Brown, Devontae. They're going to be happy. So yeah, I think this is the team to beat in this division, and I'm pretty sure Dallas is the favorite.
Yeah.
So, take the field. But then you get the Giants, week 11 bye. They play the entire NFC South between week 10 and 6 through 16. That's always a good thing for any team. And then they have 3 primetime games in a 5-week stretch. We were surprised. Obviously, we talked about it before. Giants probably shouldn't have as many primetime games as they have, but they do. And they're favored over the Minnesota Vikings week 1. I guess we are lower on them than the public. So
yeah, I mean they're my least favorite team in the NFC, including Carolina. Roster upside, all that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I don't have much faith in this team at all. I don't even know if Daniel Jones will be back week 1 because there's a lot of talk that Drew Lock is going to be starting, and he hasn't really taken the ball and run with it with Denver or Seattle.
Right.
So it's just like, I don't think that they're a very good team. They should not be favored over Minnesota. They should not have these primetime games, and they're probably going to be in the top 3 conversation in terms of overall draft pick next year.
Yeah, I'd expect this to be one of the teams that gets a quarterback out of the 2025 draft. You know, so yeah, I completely agree with you. Then we go to the Washington Commanders, who is on the way up, is more exciting. For the final 5 games against non-2023 playoff teams, they were the 4th team in this division, I believe, last year. Yes,
Yep.
absolutely. And then they travel the least of any team in 2024. It's just one of those things where, they have an opportunity because of the schedule to be a much better team than they are on paper necessarily. And new coaching staff, was it 40, almost 40 new players total on the team.
Yeah, they have the biggest
So
turnover. They have the most spending.
they're trying.
Yeah,
They are actually trying.
they're trying, but you just don't know how soon it'll translate. So again, fourth place schedule. There's a lot of winnable games on their slate. I don't know if I can vault them into the playoffs, but I did say for a reason that they were a really strong bet to win the division because it's 10-1,
hmm
and there hasn't been a repeat winner in over 20 years. So it won't be Dallas. It's either going to be Philly or Washington. Why not? Just, hey, Jalen Hurts goes down. Oh, all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Washington wins it at 10-7 or 9-8. And we saw before Washington can compete with Philly. Like last year, Sam Howell dueled it out both games. With Philly, came down to the wire. The Giants have actually swept in 2 straight years.
hmm
Don't anticipate that happening this year. So that'll be 2 more wins. And then Dallas, again, they've had Washington's number, but their head coach is the reason that they had so much success, or
It's
one of the biggest reasons. And then they took about 3-4 key role players from them as well.
right. And I think personally, like, if I look at the NFC East, like, they were playing the worst at the end of the year last year
Mhm.
out of any division by far. And if they don't figure that part out, Dallas will regress by a lot. I mean, we think 10-7. Well, it'll be 8-9, 7-10 based on not improving the roster. And then also, they played what they got blown out by Green Bay, one of the youngest teams in football. And then Philly imploded. If they continue to have that issue, we're going to see, this fact that they could also go be one of the larger differences in what their win total could be. We think 12, it could be 8 also. Well,
Mhm.
okay, why not Washington just, okay, we'll just take it, whatever. I
Right.
don't think that'll happen, but it's not out of
It's
the
now the range of
realm of,
outcomes.
yeah, exactly. So, and then moving over to the NFC West, we got the San Francisco 49ers week 9 bye, right in the middle. Beautiful bye. They face a league high 4 teams coming off of a bye: Kansas City, Dallas, Green Bay, and at Buffalo. And at Green Bay and at Buffalo are back-to-back games,
Yep.
I believe. So that's already tough enough.
Yeah, I know San Fran wasn't happy about that when that came out, just because you never want to face an abundance of teams that come off buys, let
Mm-hmm.
alone 4 teams that are probably
All playoff
all
teams.
playoff
Yeah.
teams. So that's difficult for them. It's very interesting because they have one of the best rosters. Will this be a hangover team? Because for the second year in a row, it's just like it doesn't end up where they wanted,
Mm-hmm.
and they have the roster to just be right back there again.
Right.
But I don't know how hungry they will be. And it seems like in the NFC more than the AFC, the team that has failed to win the Super Bowl comes back and is just really flat.
Mm-hmm.
And so they start off like they're easy stretch, very easy stretch with Jets at home, very good team, but they're at home Monday Night Football,
Long way to travel.
long way to travel. It's Aaron Rodgers bring back game. Wouldn't be shocked if they lost, but they're a 5-point favorite for a reason. And then Minnesota, Rams, Patriots, Cardinals, Seahawks, like
Okay.
wins
Super
all
easy.
around, and then home games against Dallas and Kansas City. Obviously, both of them are off a bye. They're at home, so it's not like they have to travel for those games. So record-wise, I think they'll be just fine
Yeah.
in the 11-12 win, 1 seed discussion. But it'll just kind of depend on how much the Rams actually rise up, because we like a lot of things they did with their roster.
Mm-hmm.
I know people think that Aaron Donald's not there anymore, so they got worse. Well, no, that's not the case. Um, they were a very good team that surprised a lot of people, and they got better. So, very dark horse team to win the division.
Yeah.
There's no chance that San Francisco, even if they do take a step back, falls out of the playoffs entirely. Even if Brock Purdy goes down, they're still going to be a 10-11 win team.
Yeah.
Like, that's how good this roster is. But it's just this. They're one of the few teams that's like postseason is the only thing that matters. Like Dallas, doesn't matter if you win 12 games. What happens in the playoffs? San Francisco. Doesn't matter if you're the 1 seed. Can you win the Super Bowl? Because that's what is avoiding you.
Hmm.
Kansas City, you're back-to-back champions. Doesn't matter if you go 13-4, like, or you're going to three-peat.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
those are like the only teams in the entire league that's just like record-wise in the regular season does not matter at all. So with that being said, I think they know that too. And how much does that the focus stay there?
Yeah. And then they have an easy stretch, like you said early. I think that, with San Fran, they should be the 1 seed, truly, just by talent alone. But they do get one of the harder schedules in football. So, just kind of combating that. Like you said, we like the Rams. The Rams are next. They got pre-bye stretch is really tough though. Week 1 through week 5, 3 away games against Detroit, Arizona, and Chicago, and then coming back home, they play San Fran and Green Bay. On that list, we see 4 playoff teams, and then the one team that no one really will want to play in 2024, in Arizona. I don't think anybody's going to really want to play them. So that'll be rough. And then they end the season with back-to-back home games, which is always nice, especially when you're trying to vie for a playoff spot. So
Right. Yeah, and they're both division games. They're both against teams that I think both Seattle and Arizona have a chance to be in the wild card discussion.
mhm.
So yeah, there's a lot to like in this schedule. Really, they have a tough 3-game stretch, week 14 through 16, where it's Buffalo at San Fran at the Jets.
Mhm.
2 of those games you lose, it really doesn't mean a ton because they're AFC opponents. San Fran's tough, but usually you split with San Fran to begin with,
Right.
and you don't have to play them week 18 again because I
Mhm.
feel like they did that 3 of the last 4 years. Um, Obviously, they've won one. They did that last year, but you don't want to have to do that to either get in or it come down to the wire. They get San Fran week 3 and then a Thursday night game, unfortunately, in between that tough AFC stretch. But a lot of good winnable games. 10-win team, 10
Yeah.
wins last year. They're going to be right there again.
Yeah, and then the Seahawks, you talked about how they might make the playoffs, could be a wild card type of team. 6 of their first 9 games at home. Post bye is filled with just coin flip teams, top to bottom. It's like, what are you supposed to do with, all these games when they're super hard to predict already. And then you just get games where it's everybody's in the middle of the pack of their division, just teams that are hard to kind of get through.
Yeah, I mean, on top of obviously their division is one of the harder divisions in football. Um, but I look at their schedule and there's not many games that I'm just like, these are for sure wins.
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously, they play the Giants, they play New England. You could put them there, but they're at New England early. And, bad teams don't know they're bad until halfway through the season, pretty much. There's always teams that just come out of nowhere and just
Right.
shock for no reason. And then the Giants, obviously, that's off a short week on the road. And then they come back at home to play the Giants. It's not for sure a win to me. But then everything else, like they're playing Buffalo, they're playing the Rams, they're playing the Niners and Cardinals and Green Bay, Chicago. Like they're not a ton of games that I can just chalk up easy wins. They're talented enough to be in the wild card discussion, but I really wonder if they're gonna hold the 2 or 3 spot in this division and how they can stay in front of it, Arizona.
Right. Yeah, Arizona, like you said, got better. We can actually jump to them and talk about the totality of this division. Arizona, week 11 bye, 5 of the first 6 games against 2023 playoff teams. So it's going to be rough. And they do get 6 games against new head coaches, which is always a good thing.
Right.
But like you said, between the Seattle and Arizona, like I kind of lean Arizona personally, like being the
Hmm.
number 3 team in this division. And I think it's very close, of course, but I personally lean Arizona, and I think is that 7 wins,
7, 8.
8 wins,
Hmm.
and that's kind of something that you kind of have to figure out because Arizona has the easier schedule. They are going to get the 4th place teams. They are bringing Kyler back. They're getting Marvin Harrison Jr., who we think is going to be good even right away. It's just, can their defense hold up is how I look at it.
Yeah, I mean, and we said their 6-game stretch to start the year. 5 of the first 6 are playoff teams, but they have in between that, the Rams, Lions, and Commanders at home.
Mm-hmm.
So, they could start out the year 2-4, and it's not the end of the world. And then right after that stretch, 3 or 4 before their bye are at home.
Yeah.
And against the Chargers, Bears, Jets, and Dolphins, winning 3 of those games wouldn't be shocking to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then after the bye, you got Seattle again, you got Minnesota, New England, Carolina. Like, there's a lot of potential W's. So that doesn't mean that they're for sure going to go above Seattle, but they're right in the range of just a lot of these games could go either way.
Right.
And so right now, I think their win total is about 6.5. It's right there where I think they'll be. 6 to 8 wins is probably a good range for them. Same with Seattle, but their win total is a game higher.
Yeah.
So it just kind of depends on how things go. But Arizona, I think, is more on the up and up, whereas Seattle, new regime. Geno, I don't know if he's the guy. I don't know how short of a leash he has. Obviously, they, brought in Sam Howell, who did fine with Washington, but he just couldn't stop getting sacked.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
he just goes to another line that is not very good. But it's an offense that's more adheres to his skill set as well. So
absolutely, for sure.
I just don't know. It's between the two, but they're both 6 to 8 win teams, and in the NFC, like, it's the weaker conference, so both of those could be dark horses to make the playoffs.
Yeah, just if you overachieve by 2 games, you're a playoff team, basically. But yeah, we appreciate y'all coming and hanging out with us. That's the end of our reaction show. We're gonna split all these divisions out so y'all can watch them individually if y'all want to. And then, of course, please like, comment, subscribe. We really appreciate when y'all do that. We got some more comments recently, and I love answering them and seeing what everybody says and thinks about it. And we appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to cover. Now that this was the final piece of the puzzle that fell, and now we have all the information. Now it's just doing the research and making the predictions and unnecessary extra content that we know you'll love. Fantasy's right around the corner as well, so we're gonna break down the schedule in multiple ways. We're gonna talk about the most anticipated games of this season, most important ones, fantasy impact, guys who kind of get a bump up or bump down in ranking because of the stretch that they have. We've done a really good job of kind of, I guess, nailing those on the head in recent years doing that. So just be out and ready for all of those things. Let us know if there's anything that you'd like us to cover. Let me know about your teams and what you feel about your schedule, and what do you think their record will be?
Yeah, absolutely. If you think
it's right about that prediction season, so we want to hear y'all's numbers as well. It's not just about what we think, because we're not going to hit the nail on the head on
we're not going to be right on every team, but we're going to hopefully come close, right? That's kind of the point. But yeah, so we really appreciate it, and we'll see y'all next time.